I've really outdone myself this time and waited 11 whole books before updating my reading journal. So we need to do a big reading wrap-up and catch up on my journal. We'll start with 5 journal spreads today, so let's get started. I've been reading all sorts of genres these past few months, from literary fiction to middle grade to non-fiction to fantasy. I've really just been reading whatever I felt like. Let's start with some literary fiction. I read Winter in Sokcho by Elisa Shuadusaphin, translated by Anissa Abbas Higgins. He arrived muffled up in a woolen coat. He put his suitcase down at my feet and pulled off his hat. Western face, dark eyes, hair combed to one side. He looked straight through me without seeing me. The book opens describing a French graphic novelist arriving at a guest house in Sokcho, where our unnamed narrator works. He's there to find inspiration in the snowy town that is a bit more dark and eerie during winter than during the summer, when tourists flock to the beaches and waterfalls. They form an odd relationship with each other. She's really trying to show him authentic Korea, as he claims to want to discover, but he sort of stays seemingly uninterested. He's not even willing to try the traditional Korean cooking that she prepares for him every night. It's not quite friendship, it's not quite something more or something less. It's a tad uncomfortable and a significant focus of the book because there's not that much plot going on otherwise. There's this quote that says, "Oozing winter and fish, Sokcho waited." That was Sokcho, always waiting for tourists, for boats, men, spring. And this quote really reflects the book well. It feels as if we are waiting, not much is happening. It's very slice of life in a touristy town during the off-season. Yet at the same time, there's a lot going on with our main character and narrator. She feels stuck in Sokcho. It's not actually where she wants to be, but she doesn't feel like she can leave. And then in comes this French guy, and now it's kind of confusing and overwhelming. And the author does such a great job at conveying that feeling. So it's an incredibly slow burn in terms of plot, and we don't cover a lot of time, but we learn a lot about our main character through themes of cultural identity, body image, family dynamics, etc. And there's also this tension that begins right from the start of the book that makes this sense of waiting more meaningful. It's not just the moody reflection of the dark winter season. You can tell that there's something more to it, and it keeps you waiting for whether this is actually leading somewhere. It's a short book. It's just over 150 pages long, so I would recommend it if it sounds at all interesting to you. It's relatively easy to read. The language is quite simple and not overly poetic, but it really creates an atmosphere. It reminded me at times of Convenience Store Woman, which is a similar slice of life story with this odd feeling to it. This one has a different sort of theme and setting and vibe, but I think if you enjoyed Convenience Store Woman or similar books, you might also like this one as well. Although it's perhaps not as strange, I would say, but it has that dark edge to it, if that makes sense. For me, this was a solid 3.5 stars. I think it did really well in what it set out to do. It's not my favorite genre of book, I think, but a good book nonetheless if this is the type of story you're looking for. The other literary fiction book I read was A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. I talked about this book at length in a different video, but here is a quick recap or summary if you didn't yet see that one. The book opens with our main character introducing herself. "Hello, my name is Now, and I'm a time being. Do you know what a time being is? Well, if you give me a moment, I will tell you. now as a 14-year-old girl living in Japan who is writing a diary. She grew up mostly in the US since her family moved there for her father's job when she was still very young, but recently they moved back to Japan. Since being back, she's been feeling pretty isolated, different, she's getting bullied, and she struggles with this sense of identity, worsened also by her home situation. She shares pretty early on in her diary that she no longer wants to live and that soon she won't be alive, but before that she's writing this diary because she wants to tell the world about her grandmother Jiko, who is a Zen Buddhist and who she really admires. The other POV is Ruth, a writer living on a remote island in Canada who one day finds a Hello Kitty lunchbox washed ashore, possibly coming from the tsunami that happened in Japan. The box is filled with different things, including some old letters and a diary from a girl called Now. Ruth is immediately intrigued, and as she reads on in the journal, she tries to uncover this mystery that is Now and her family. That is a broad setting of the story, and I think it's really better to go into this book without knowing too much about the plot. One remarkable thing about this book is the blurred lines between fact and fiction, not only in some of the events, but mainly in the reader-writer relationship. Now addresses you as a potential reader of her diary, and so it doesn't allow you to be in this fictional world because you feel like you're part of it. I personally really enjoyed this. It made me feel really present as a reader and kept me engaged in a different way than a strong fictional world would do, but definitely equally so. There's also this question of author Ruth Ozeki and main character Ruth, and so all these layers give it that little bit of extra. Both POVs have very distinct voices. You have a 14-year-old girl who is really just yapping and obviously loses track of her story most of the time and goes on wild tangents and tells stories with an innocence that covers up a bit of the harshness of the reality that she's facing. Whereas Ruth is a very mature voice and kind of frames these things that are happening to Now in a much more serious and emotional way that is kind of a reality check for the reader. Both of the POVs are very introspective and observant POVs, which I really enjoyed and make you feel very connected to their story and their emotions. I really enjoyed the writing for these reasons and more, such as the added humor, some of the magical realism in these gorgeous settings of Buddhist temples in Japan and its remote island in British Columbia, which are both such prime locations for a bit of magical realism. The writing is not the only thing I enjoyed about this book. It also has layers and layers of messages that could be taken from this book. I won't go into detail as I did in the other video, but I do feel like I should touch on the main concept of the time being. When I read the title, I definitely thought of it as for the time being, meaning present time, which also fits, but additionally it explores this idea that everyone and everything is a time being. The idea that time and being is the same, that time is not separate from you, we are the present, and time does not come and go because we're all being all the time. It touches on existential philosophy in this very light and hopeful way, so quite contrary to how modern existential literature is, so I quite enjoyed that as well. There are lots of less explicit messages in this book as well on how we see each other, connect with each other, or forgot to. So I can't wait to read this book again someday and just discover a whole new range of things that I can take away from it. We have two very introspective main characters thinking about life and death, so it's impossible as a reader not to ask yourself some of these very same questions. Who we are and why we are and if we're doing it right. And so I noticed I was thinking about the book or the ideas in it quite often still after I read it. And while it's not a novel where I sob throughout, there are some really emotional moments and also really uncomfortable parts, especially when it came to the bullying. There are some rather graphic parts describing these instances, and they're really heavy to read, especially knowing that these are the realities for quite a lot of kids. So make sure to take care if you do decide to read this book. Despite all of that, there is an overwhelming feeling of hope and gratefulness to this book, which I really enjoyed. Despite its devastating moments, the overall message is really positive. So this book was a 4.5 stars for me, would definitely recommend it. It's just that right amount of strange, has beautiful messages, it has interesting writing as well. Another book I finished recently was Getting Things Done by David Allen. Nonfiction is somewhat rare on my channel, and while I've been trying to read more nonfiction, I never thought that I would review or even read a productivity book. I would consider myself a productive person. From a young age, I've been praised and I've taken pride in my time management and effectiveness in getting things done. But last month, someone asked me for some tips on how to better manage their time, and my mind just went blank. And as my maths tutor used to tell me all the time, if you can't explain it, you don't know it well enough. So I decided to read a productivity book, and I started with this one, Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity. Since it seems to be a staple and one of the early key productivity books, I have mixed feelings about this book. It presents a fantastic system, but takes way too long in explaining it. And while this book talks a lot about the importance of clarity and simplicity, that's not exactly what this book gives us, but is the outcome that you will achieve if you do make it to the end. But to be honest, the only people who can make it through this 400-page book on productivity kind of already have to be managing their time quite well. But I do really like the system that the book presents. It takes the idea of, if you tell yourself you'll remember this, you're lying to yourself, and it really runs with it. While it may be a little bit outdated now, it starts from a challenge or a problem that is still very accurate today, in that we're allowing in huge amounts of information and communication from the outer world and generating an equally large volume of ideas and agreements with others and ourselves from the inner world. And we haven't been well equipped to deal with this huge number of internal and external commitments. And so we end up forgetting things and stress about forgetting them, and our brains are just constantly working just to try to keep us current in what we need to do and when and how. The author calls this open loops, explaining that you've probably made more agreements with yourself than you realize, and every single one of them, big or little, is being tracked by a less unconscious part of you. These are the incompletes or open loops, which I define as anything pulling at your attention that doesn't belong where it is, the way it is. Which means that we have less brain capacity to actually do the work we're supposed to do and to be creative and let the mind wander towards new things. Now, I should say that I grew up with a mom who was always yelling at me that I should have written it down whenever I forgot something. So that's what I've been doing for the past 10 years. I've been writing everything down. My to-do lists have always been up to date, and while I've created a bit of a system of my own, it's nowhere near as complete and effective as the one that is presented in this book. It comes down to 5 steps. The first is capture. You need to collect all of these incompletes, these open loops, and he really does mean everything. Then we need to clarify, essentially making the decision that needs to be done with this open loop so that you know what action to take next. Once we're clear on the next steps, we need to organize, and he presents an interesting way to organize projects, different type of lists in your calendar. Step 4 is to reflect. We need to know when we need to review all of these things. He suggests this once a week review to make sure that you gather all of your stuff, review your system, update your list, and you can really get clean, current, and complete. He makes an important point that the more complete your system is, the more you'll trust it. And the more you trust it, the more complete you'll be motivated to keep it. And I really agree with that now that I've been using this system for about a month. It's a bit daunting at first to capture everything, all of your incompletes. It feels like too much work in itself. But I really feel like it paid off. I feel so much more confident and I'm not forgetting things because I know I'm really committed to capturing any new thing that comes up in more detail than I've ever done before. Now the last step is engage. I found this to be a little less clear and perhaps the least useful part of this book because I think it depends a lot on your type of job or if you're still studying. So I didn't pick up that much from this part, but the system up until that point of actually doing the work that needs to be done is definitely worth the title of making your life less stressful. So I would perhaps tentatively recommend this book because I actually want to follow it up by reading Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte, which I heard about on a podcast while doing some of these reading journal spreads actually, and it seems to be inspired by getting things done. And I feel like it might give a more modern or updated take on this, so I will get back to you on which one I think you should read. But the concept that both of these books present, I find to be really, really useful. I also read one middle grade novel, The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. Our story begins on the ocean, with wind and rain and thunder and lightning and waves. And that's when we meet Roz, a robot who wakes up all alone on a remote island. She doesn't know where she is or why she is there, but she knows that she needs to survive, and so Roz tries to adapt to her surroundings the best as she possibly can. It's a struggle at first because, of course, all the animals on the island see her as this big foreign monster, but Roz tries to become friends with them. But that's not without any challenges. It's such a heartwarming story, and it has that balance of tragedy and joy that I like in children's books and movies so much. It's filled with adventure and themes of friendship, wonder, found family. I also enjoyed the writing. It really gives you that feeling of wonder that the robot feels as she steps into this new world. But at the same time, there's some dry humor suddenly, for example, saying that if you stand in a forest long enough, eventually something will fall on you. The illustrations are also really cute, and it's probably why I decided to pick this up. I don't remember, I didn't have a specific reason that I picked this up. I probably won't read the other books in the series for now. It's not that the story was that amazing or memorable, but I think that when I do have young readers around of my own, this will definitely be a children's book series that I want to get. When I mention tragedy, I should say that that also means some content warnings. There are some animal deaths in this book, which some younger children might be sensitive towards, and there are definitely some emotional parts, so depending on how you feel about children reading about that, I would or wouldn't recommend it. I personally think it's done well, and I know that there's a lot of advocates saying that it's good for children to read about sadness in fictional stories because it's a safe setting for understanding that life sometimes is sad, but just thought I should mention those content warnings in case. I haven't spoken much about my journal spreads so far in this video, but for this particular one, I was inspired by a scene or a part of the book that I read. In the early stages, when Roz wakes up on the island, she figures out that she has to somehow camouflage herself. She's this shiny robot walking in a forest. And so she covers herself in mud and puts on branches and flowers and everything to look like she fits in on this green island. And so I wanted to capture that part and take the opportunity for drawing some more floral patterns again. The book describes it as: she began by smearing handfuls of thick mud over her entire body. Then she plucked ferns and grasses from the ground and sank their roots into her new muddy coating. She placed colorful flowers around her face to disguise her glowing eyes, and any bare patches were covered with tree leaves and strips of moss. Our robot now looked like a great tuft of plants walking through the forest. Finally, I also read Loveless by Alice Oseman, which opens with, there were literally 3 separate couples sitting around a fire making out, like some sort of organized kissing orgy. And half of me was like, ew, and the other half was like, wow, I sure do wish that was me. It's pretty obvious from the get-go that the topic of Loveless is love, especially the teenage, all-consuming, I will never recover from this type of love. Our main character is Georgia, and she's never been in love nor had a crush on anyone, but she's obsessed with rom-coms and fan fiction, so she's determined that she will find that type of love someday, preferably sometime soon. She arrives at Durham University with her 2 best friends, and she's ready to find that love. Obviously, things don't go the way that she thinks it all will go, and she slowly starts to question her identity and is being introduced to all of these new people and concepts such as asexual and aromantic, and she feels more confused than ever. Her plan to find love obviously is taking a big turn. I really liked how open this book was about relationships and sexuality and exploration. I haven't read that many YA books that do it like that, and I think it's so important for these things not to be taboo even in YA. The romance that is in this book is a slow burn, and I like the way that it was written into the overall story. But it also has a very strong focus on friendships and platonic love. And it shows that also these relationships can be complex and difficult to navigate at times, but ultimately they're so important and powerful. And aside from these topics being covered, it's also just a college drama about the scary experience of making friends at uni and pulling all-nighters at parties that you didn't want to go to in the first place, and about losing your friends, and some very strong opinions about Scooby-Doo. I would definitely recommend this book. If you've enjoyed the author's other books, you'll definitely like this one also. I've read Heartstopper and Radio Silence before as well, which I enjoyed both. I would say Loveless is definitely sticking with me more than Radio Silence. I feel like I've forgotten a lot about what that was about. I enjoyed it, but perhaps I had too high expectations of it coming from people who read it during their teenage years, and obviously that was hitting differently with them at that time. So yeah, I think for Loveless, I would say 4 stars. So these were the first 5 journal entries of this probably 2-part wrap-up. I'll be back soon with more. Here's a little flip through of the reading spreads from today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.